Okay, we are live. We can start. Have a good discussion.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session. Our session is titled Mapping Livable Futures from Africa. My name is Diana Ross Rono. I am a junior researcher and a PhD student at the University of Tübingen. And I would like to start by welcoming you all and introducing our speakers for this session. We have three speakers joining us today to talk about mapping livable futures from Africa. Our first speaker is Adams Mututa from University of Johannesburg in South Africa. Adams' area of research covers African cinema, post-colonial cinema cultures, and critical theory. And he's joining us today to talk about the place of recursion in African futurism, a cinema perspective. Welcome, Adams, and we'll look forward to that very interesting talk. Our second speaker of the day is Felix Mutunga from Taita University in Kenya. And his research interests revolve around literatures of the Black diaspora. And he's joining us and he will share with us about Kenyan geographies of affect, mapping livable futures in Kenyan popular music. Welcome, Mr. Mutunga, and we look forward to that very lively, engaging discussion. Our third speaker for the day is Malik from Senegal. Mr. Malik L.O., I hope I'm getting your name right, is a graduate student in African and post-colonial studies at Sheikh Anta Diop, sorry, let me go over that again. Sheikh Anta Diop University in Dakar, Senegal. He's currently pursuing his MA in French and Francophone Studies at the University of Colorado. And Mr. L.O.'s research interests revolve around Francophone literature and theater, African cinema, trauma studies, and post-colonial literature. He's interested in how these cultural forms reflect social realities, preserve historical memory, and contribute decolonial thought. Welcome, Mr. Malik, and straight away we would start with our first speaker, and Mr. Adams Mututa. You can take over.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you so much, colleagues. Please allow me to share my screen with you. Okay, so I do trust that you can see my screen, which is my presentation for today. I think I'll start with a confession that I was a bit too ambitious and I made a significantly long presentation. I hope I'll be able to rush through it in the allocated time. And so my colleagues, today I want to speak about the idea of African futurism, which is relatively new in discussing post-colonial Africa. But my main kind of claim will be that, okay, sorry, I think I have to find a way to zoom this out. Okay. So my main idea or my main claim will be that when we look at Afrofuturism, African futurism, we have to pay attention to what it is trying to do. And I will argue that it is one of the many phrases that have come along and which try to articulate the idea of Africa. And in doing so, my main goal is to really highlight that we are going back in some kind of circles that we have to be aware of what these terminologies are trying to achieve in terms of mapping new theories about Africa, as well as in proposing ideas with which we can discuss post-colonial Africa. And so I start my discussion with the timeline of Africa in global history. Basically, when you look at the main global epochs, we have the first industrial revolution from 1750s, and then the second industrial revolution from 1870s. But even before the first industrial revolution, Africa was already incorporated into the global labor market through the transatlantic slave trade, which was some kind of human trafficking for free labor to the West. So as the West industrialized from 1750s all the way to 1914, the end of the second industrial revolution, Africa was already participating, but as, you know, a kind of exploited resource. I want particularly to highlight the Berlin Conference, which was between 1884 and 1885, which actually brought Africa to the center of global events. For it was during this conference that already the slave trade has finished, but industrialization has taken root. So Africa was colonized for resources and for labor. But before long, then we have the First World War, Second World War, after which we come into the Cold War of 1947 to 1991. In this period, we also have what we call the Third Industrial Revolution, which starts from 1950s onwards. And thereafter, we have currently the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But colleagues, my question is, where has Africa been in these conversations as these global events are happening? What kind of conversations are happening around Africa? When you look at the First Industrial Revolution, and even before that slightly, where we have global trade in gold and also ivory and rubber, Africa was mainly targeted for free labor and raw materials. So Africans were expendable resources in this kind of events. Between 1870s and all the way to the end of the Second World War, Africa was also supplying some kind of labor, including military labor for the colonizer. From 1950s, the conversation changed because we are already in the era of decolonization, and we enter into post-colonialism in late 50s, early 60s, and so on, when most of Africa was actually decolonized. So the idea of African futurism, which I discussed today, originates from around this area, from 1950s onwards. And I'll show why we have to think about it like that. But before that, I want to map out a little history of African futurism, among other terms. And this comes from the idea of core futurism. Core futurism is a movement that seeks to analyze text and cultures and other literary materials in terms of the location from which it emanates and the identities of these people. So African futurism, as Afrofuturism and many other futurisms, are part of a big global movement towards indigenous self-articulation. And so the main question of all these aspects is, how do we imprint ourselves into the discussions and imaginaries of the future? And I think this is important because we think of post-colonialism as a question of the past. We say we were colonized and so on and so forth. But African futurism, among other futurisms, try to talk about the future. Where is our future? Now, these core futurisms, without mentioning other regions, for Africa, it is something that started in 1930s. And this is where we have the movement called the Negritudes in France, and people are talking about how do we become proud of ourselves. Then from 1962, we have another movement which we call the Africanicity, which is also about how Africans do things, and can we intercept the concept of Africanism? Then we go to Afrocentrism of 1970s, Afrofuturism of 1990s, and currently African futurism from 2019. So when we see it in this way, then African futurism becomes easier to understand because its claims can be understood in context of the past. And we can see that kind of continuation, which is my main argument, that it is not something new actually. We only have to understand that it is part of an ongoing effort to insert Africa into global conversations. So these conversations have been about looking for the authentic voice of Africa and also creating counter narratives from the so-called colonialism. We can see this in the works of philosophers like V.Y. Mdimbe. We can look at the works of Gugu Abiongo and Wole Soyinka, very big African literary icons. We can look at cinema of Osman Sembene, Suleiman Sise, and Jean-Marie Eteno. We can look at the writings of people like Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, Ogiga Ondinga. And in this kind of productions, we see that Africa, from as early as decolonial efforts of the 1950s, there was this effort to understand the Africa in the future. So Afrofuturism of the 1990s and African futurism of 2019, they arise from an already well-established regime of thinking. So what was Afrofuturism? This was mainly a way of imagining the process of salvaging the idea of Africa. But it was speculating mostly on the question of African Americans. How can African Americans insert themselves in terms of their identity, their thinking, their beliefs into the technocultures of their society, that is within the United States of America? And they do this through different ways. We have paintings, we have movies, we have records of music like hip hop culture, gangster music, and that kind of thing coming up, including version, which were seen as ways of intercepting actually the future and also building fantasies around who they were. We have African futurism coming in 2019, and mainly, and this is something interesting, it was not through a cultural critic, but an author from Nigeria who talks of the essence of actually grounding the same kind of ideas from Afrofuturism, but grounding them within African space and African beliefs. So the big difference between Afrofuturism and African futurism becomes to what extent is the discussion based within Africa or outside Africa? That is number one. And number two, what does it allow us to put into discussion? So African futurism thought it is important to consider African spirituality, Judaism, cosmology, traditions, and all these kind of things which African belief and cultures kind of articulate. And so
interrupt, but in the interest of time, you have 5 minutes. So
okay, I think I'll try to rush around. And so the thing is, in looking at these concepts, I was looking at the films of Suleiman Sise, especially this film from 1987, which really talks about Africa from the point of view of spirituality and cosmology. It looks at the kind of conflict between son and father, but using magical kind of realism in that space. So in proposing that we can look at this whole question of African futurism in terms of recursion. And in recursion, I want to talk of how much as we advance towards the future, we are actually going back and intercepting the past. And so this is the kind of idea that I am proposing here. But I have one question which I think I will have to articulate now, and this has got to do, these two concepts are always looking to technocultures. But must the future idea be about technocultures and fantasy, for example? If we try to articulate Africa in terms of the technology, an area where we know Africa is always lagging behind, it was not properly incorporated into the global kind of context, are we not actually working against ourselves? In that sense, I'm actually questioning the value of African futurism if we are to ground it within these parameters which we have actually identified. In the interest of time, I'll not read this, but I want to read this one. And my question is, what is really the essence of Afrofuturism or African futurism, if we want to think about it that way? Is it actually responsive to the needs that we want in terms of thinking about Africa? If we continue to use these kind of frameworks, where are we heading? And what are the alternatives that we can use to achieve a more realistic, more meaningful kind of debate around Africa? So my proposition is that we actually need a future-looking theory or framework, and African futurism, like many others, is not that framework. So thank you so much. I will appreciate your time.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Thank you for sharing your ideas with us about the position of indigeneity and in the questions of the past and the present, and the place of recursion in all this. For our audience and all the people who have joined us online, if you have any questions for our presenter, I suggest that that maybe you note them down somewhere, and then we can move to the other two speakers of the day, and then we'll have our question and answer session once all our presenters have talked. So without much ado, let us move to our second speaker of the day, and this would be Felix Mutunga. Felix, I hope you can hear me. You can take over. You're welcome.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Adam, as well, for that thought-provoking conversation. As Diana said at the beginning of the presentation, I wanted to talk about geographies of affect, mapping livable futures in Kenyan popular music. The presentation was curated as part of a larger study that I'm carrying out. And because of the limitations of time, I don't want to dwell a lot on the theoretical grounding of it. I just want to jump right in into the discussion into the meat of it, so to speak. So in this presentation, I want to talk about two popular Kenyan songs. That is Nyashinski's Baby Baby, right? And Sasa Hivi by Vijana Barubaru and Gogo Ashley. My aim is that I want to show how they present an avenue through which we can examine complex processes of self-making and becoming, and forms of intimacy and care that radically reimagine Kenyan socialities. At the end of the presentation, I also aim to show that love in these songs is cast as pending completion, in the sense that it's satisfactory practice and experiencing as something that exists in waiting, suspended to some imagined future within urban and capitalist environments in Nairobi, environments that cannibalize and constrain the practices of love. But on top of that, I want to show how both songs do not just imagine liberatory, intimate, and relational futures. For me, they assemble affective and disruptive solidarities that the musical personas use to channel various forms of political engagement, that contemplate the assembling of live affirming and egalitarian national futures that run counter to past and present violent temporalities. My first song, Baby Baby, by Nyashinsky, portrays, by the way, that's the Baby Baby spelled B-E-B-I, right? A corruption of, the term of endearment that, people use, baby. So, Baby Baby portrays the precarity of young love when it is faced by economic vulnerabilities and transactionality of intimacy in Nairobi's urban margins. The lyrics present a young man's appeal to his girlfriend not to succumb to the material seductions that filter into the neighborhood which they live in through sponsors, quote unquote, wealthy men who finance younger women's luxurious lifestyles in exchange for sex and companionship. Underlining these masculine anxieties about the inability of the male persona to provide, the song's musical persona promises the female partner a shared future if she stays loyal to him despite the sponsor's seductions. At some point he says, usiache happen, ishikilie ka siri, nikimake it in life then, itakushikilia pia mimi. Here, in those lyrics, if I can translate them, basically it's an exhortation by the persona, by the musical persona, to his love interest that she should not allow someone to replace him, while at the same time he's promising that when he will make it in life, he will also, quote unquote, hold her, which in the end, for me, is an expectation of her fidelity in exchange for his provision. We can read this in several ways. To begin with, it is possible to read this as a promise of material provision born out of attentiveness and care. This is especially so because the musical persona appears to recognize both their vulnerability within urban spaces that are marked by disposability, inequality, and economic marginalization. However, the fact that the musical persona frames that future in traditional gender roles and does not imagine other non-conventional alternatives takes away, sort of chips away this possibility that he profers. Additionally, beneath the exhortations of fidelity, I think that there lies an unquestioned and insidious presentation of the woman as easily manipulable and fickle. Moreover, this framing that gives prominence to the male partner's experiences serves to amplify his psychological and emotional turmoil in addition to his economic insecurities. The acknowledgement of his incapacity to satisfy the partner's hunger, quote unquote, with what he calls aimless banter, or his inability to help her with her bills is not only an evocation of a masculine poetics of inadequacy, it is also an invocation of his marginality and disposability within wider regimes of power. So, recognizing his present financial incapacity, he implores his partner to stick by him, while promising that he won't forget or desert her when he makes it in life. This promise, for me, is indicative of the ways in which to live in Nairobi's urban margins is to exist in perpetual conditions of suspense and waiting for better futures. So just as their love is suspended or appears, the completion, the full experiencing of their love and intimacy seems to be suspended to a future that, where he envisions a much more equitable, a much more just, future. So are the national futures rendered the same way. So it can be read to mean that the blossoming of their love is an exercise in waiting. It's fulfilling potential pending some financially stable future. This carries, for me, a whole range of possibilities because in this promise of allegiance, the song betrays an investment in both dignifying financial futures and better egalitarian and mutually sustaining horizons for their love. For this reason, we can read this condition of waiting and hope for better horizons as part of a larger spectrum of desires for equity and change. However, and as I say, the possibilities profiled here need to be unpacked very carefully because as actually is characteristic of popular genres, there is a deep ambivalence that defines the imagination of these futures. Because the promise of better relational and economic horizons in the song appear to be compromised by the framing of the future as another exercise actually in masculine self-making and a problematic cooptation into unequal economic systems. In the end, reading Nyashinsky's Baby Baby that recognizes the spaces and political conditions that love is practiced and the unpacking of both individual and collective vulnerabilities brings to the surface the precarity of life in these urban margins and how these conditions nurture insecure and even hostile love and intimacies. Because these are spaces that are defined by deprivation, inequality, political and economic marginalization that seem to intensify female vulnerability and masculine insecurities. So they are shown to have this capacity to produce an environment of mistrust and suspicion, which suffocate and deform the practice of love and intimacy. It is in this context then that I think that the musical persona begins imagining better futures, better intimate futures. And in this, we read that desire for egalitarian and inclusive national futures. The other song that I want to talk to us about today is by Vijana Barubaru and Gogo Ashley, titled Sasa Hivi. Sasa Hivi is Swahili for right now, right? And this song represents how love and intimacy surface transformative subjectivities, but also how they imagine the assembling of solidarities that are usefully deployed against what I would call encirclement and zombification by various gendered, spatial, and capitalist regimes. Vijana Barubaru is a Kenyan musical group that brings together two individuals, Tuku Kantu and Mwanawambui. Those are their stage names. The song, as I said, presents both an affirming and an all-encompassing romantic love that is nevertheless tied to the quotidian experiences of urban living. I found an interview that these musicians did sometimes back, where they said that the inspiration behind Sasa Hivi came about as a desire to sing about living in the moment and seizing short-lived and fleeting moments of joy in the backdrop of what they see as constrained lives in Nairobi's margins. So this urgency of loving in the immediate moment, Sasa Hivi. So because the musical persona say, I'll love you right now, nitakupenda saa hii, na kama si saa hii, ni sasa hivi. I'll love you right now, and if it's not right now, it's right now, you know, kind of tautological. So this urgency of loving the immediate moment is presented as necessary because of the uncertainty, not just of life itself, but also material resources, material resource uncertainties that defines life in these urban margins. It is this way that the song underlines the urgency and force of love in constraining spaces, while also signaling how love and intimacy help the duo make sense of the economic and political contexts. In the song's expressed desire to love right now, the artists articulate forms of hope, forms of pleasure, forms of fulfillment, albeit we sense very anxious. So these coexist together. But the thing that I take away from the song is that the love, the fulfilling aspect of love refuses to be overwhelmed by the brutality and precariousness of life within the Nairobi's urban margins. For this reason, therefore, when they sing about a bad economy, but promise to spend their 2 days with you, right? I'm quoting bits and parts of the song. The artists express the promise of love and loyalty despite their estranging conditions. As such, the existing and future uncertainties are colored with an alertness of the pleasures and possibilities that love and intimacy proffer. With this promise and alertness, we sense a productive investment and disinvestment in intimate futures. So there are two contrasting things there. This is because on the one hand, the song makes us imagine lasting and egalitarian day-to-day fidelities that defy material constraints. Gogo Ashley says at some point that my love is strong enough in the second stanza. And these echoes, it's a sort of a declaration of these capacious forms of love, inexhaustible and uncompromisable fidelities and selfless care in a background of betrayal and squashed hopes that we saw in the previous song, Baby Baby. So this investing in intimate futures that are alive to the quotidian struggles and inequalities in the present is in itself a rejection of simplistic and easy promises of better tomorrows that Baby Baby prefers, without showing how these futures might often be unattainable for certain demographics. In rejecting that simplistic narrative, you might say a simplistic narrative of grass to grace story, the song appears to gesture at a much more comprehensive national transformation that does not just offer cosmetic and individualized change. Because we feel in the previous song, Baby Baby, we feel that the musical persona envisions change as, or better, egalitarian, for him, egalitarian futures, it's his inclusion into these systems of domination that do not bring communal or national change. This is reversed in this song. So on the other hand, in loving right now, there is also an unstated and contradictory concession that love might not be long-lived. And this releases them from the eternal fealties that might not be imaginable in the present moment's desolation. I
Sorry
think
to
that
interrupt, Mr. Mutunga.
Yes.
Yeah, you have like 5 minutes.
All right, I'm winding up actually.
Mhm.
So this disinvestment in romantic afterlives might therefore be a nod to the precarity of their love and this possibility given the various forms of brutality and debility found in Nairobi's margins. For this reason, therefore, to love right now is an act of refusal. It's a rebellion in conditions that create hostile relations. Further, the song also mounts various critiques of Kenya's intimate and political economies. And so I'll not go into that because I'll just put it in one sentence. At some point, the musical personas sing about their practice and experiences of love in ways that run counter to how love is marketed, the commercialization of love. They reject the Mwanawambui at some point says, that they can plan to go to a trip to Nanyuki, but then he says, no, we are not going to do that because according to him, hiyo ni trip ya njaa. It's a hunger trip, basically. He envisions love not in ways that consumerism frames love, but love in ways that are much more intimate, love in ways that radically reimagine socialities within Kenyan urban centers. But so finally, let me say that the song itself also summons some interesting forms of solidarity that romantic love is capable of assembling. This is eloquently portrayed in Gogo Ashley's second stanza, where the musical persona assures the male partner that ukipigana na dunia, I'll be fighting by your side. I'm on your team, not against you. I think that this is, for me, that this is not just a romantic pledge of loyalty and an assumption of the responsibility of safeguarding the emotional well-being of the partner. It is much more than that. It portrays an awareness of both shared struggles and social justice agendas existing within blighted urban spaces, and romantic love as a possible mobilizing force. The use of the words fighting and team in the lyrics, for me, usefully portrays life in Nairobi's margins as war, and a war that demands intimate solidarities. For this reason, therefore, these declarations of fidelity and allegiance are significant in the ways in which they assemble progressive connections alongside necessary revolutionary energy in spaces defined by numbing forms of socioeconomic and political assault, neglect, and betrayal. So in conclusion, for the purposes of time, these songs present love and intimacy not just as tools of containment, right? Because Baby Baby at some point, because for him, he imagines intimate futures in marriage. He imagines intimate futures in some sort of cooptation into dominant economic systems. So they are not just tools of containment, they are also generative forces that imagine livable futures, assemble useful solidarities, but also enable transformative forms of care, embodiment, and pleasure. There's this Kenyan scholar I like, Keguro Macharia, who usefully writes about love as a political vernacular. That to him, love is a political vernacular. It helps us imagine other ways to be and to be together in conditions of freedom. Masharia sees love and freedom, right? He writes about love and freedom as a vernacular that can help us imagine how we want to live with each other and what we want to build together. A vernacular that can help, that can direct us to create and shape our demands to those in power. And I add on to that, to shape our demands for a better future. Ultimately, therefore, Macharia sees love as a doing word, a we sustaining word whose practices pushes us toward making collective living more possible and more pleasurable. And I think sasa hivi, more than Baby Baby, seems to articulate this form of constructing, demanding collective, more possible and pleasurable futures in the Kenyan nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mutunga, for that wonderful presentation on the expression of love and intimacy in popular art forms and how they imagine livable futures as expressed through their lyrics and their musical personas. Okay, again, I would like to remind our online audience that if you have any questions for Mr. Mutunga, please note them down somewhere. We will come back to your questions at the end after we have had, or after we have listened to our third presenter of the day. And our third presenter is Mr. Malik LO from Senegal. And Mr. Malik, if you can hear me, then the floor is yours. Welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. Right, let me just share my screen. Can you see my presentation, my screen? Okay, good. So thank you so much. So in this presentation, I will focus on two Senegalese film, Borom Saret, directed by Ousmane Sembène in 1963, which is often considered the first narrative feature film in African cinema, and Atlantics, directed by Mati Diop in 2019, which won the Grand Prix at the Cannes Festival, and which was recently released on Netflix. So these films, though separated by more than 50 years, are deeply connected in their attention to the lives of ordinary people, their struggles, their desires, their losses, and their resilience, as well as the structural and historical conditions that shape their experiences, including post-colonial social hierarchies, economic precarity, migration, and gender power dynamics. So to guide this exploration, I will also draw upon the work of three major theorists. First, Achille Mbembe, whose concepts of necropolitics emphasize the power to decide who may live and who must die, and how sovereignty is enacted both spatially and socially through violence, occupation, and the management of populations. Second, Walter Mignolo, who focuses on epistemic disobedience and decolonial thinking, urging us to move beyond Western-centric categories of knowledge and to understand reality from the perspectives of those historically marginalized or colonized. And third, Laurent Belland, who offers insight into precarity and cruel optimism, showing us how attachment, desire, and hope are shaped by structural instability, and the often contradictory conditions of living in a world where futures are uncertain. And by the end of this presentation, I want to show that cinema is not simply a reflection of life or a tool for entertainment. It is a ritualized engagement with the ethical, historical, social, and emotional dimensions of human existence, a space in which the ordinary and the extraordinary, the visible and the invisible, the alive and the absent intersect, and where the viewers is called to witness, to see, to reflect, and to respond to the realities presented on the screen. So before we start analyzing this film, it is important to understand by what I mean by cinema as a ritual. So according to Cambridge English Dictionary, a ritual is a way of doing something in which the same actions are done in the same way every time. And what I mean by cinema as ritual here is a structured and repeated practice through which individuals or communities engage with memory, morality, or social order. It creates a space where audiences are not merely passive spectators, but are invited to observe and to reflect, to witness social injustices, human suffering, and ethical dimensions, and to engage with history, right, and society in a reflective and morally aware way. So in Bottom Saret, Sembène used the story of a simple cab driver to reveal deep social inequalities and effect of urban and post-colonial hierarchies. The driver, Bottom Saret, moves through the city, interacts with a wide range of people, and negotiate his daily survival, all of which reveals the structural forces shaping life in Dakar in the 1960s. So the film allows us to witness the ethical and social realities of post-colonial life. Similarly, in Atlantics, Job presents the migration of young men as a ghost story that dramatizes the ethical and social consequences of absence. Right. So here, cinema is not just showing us events; it is showing the haunting effects of social, economic, and historical structures on individuals and communities, particularly on women who are left behind. So Walter Mignolo's concept of epistemic disobedience help us understand this point. So he writes, epistemic disobedience leads us to decolonial options. Delinking is necessary because there is no way out of coloniality of power from within Western categories of thought. So this means that to truly understand films like Borom Saret or Atlantics, we need to challenge our familiar ways of thinking, step outside the frameworks of Western knowledge, and to engage with the ethical, social, and historical perspectives of the people whose lives are being depicted. Cinema, in this sense, becomes a space for ethical reflection, historical understanding, and decolonial engagement, where we are invited to witness life but as a morally and socially meaningful experience. I want to show you a short extract uh, of a movie of this film.
J'implore sur moi et les miens la protection divine d'Allah, le miséricordieux, qu'il me protège des lois et des mécréants. Amen, amen, amen.
Que Dieu t'accompagne et pense que nous n'avons rien comme midi.
Merci pour tes souhaits.
So the film begins with Borom Saret, like the cab driver, leaving his modest home. This ordinary act is a rich symbolic and ethical significance, right? Leaving home represents the beginning of a daily ritual of labor and survival, right? A negotiation with social, economic, and political forces that are beyond his control. Each interaction with a passenger and each encounter with authority figures represent the constant negotiation required to survive in a post-colonial urban environment. So Berland's concept of notion of precarity is evident here. Like this notion of precarity, as Borom Saret's life depends on navigating both material and scarcity and social hierarchy. His journey through the city is not just physical, it is moral, social, ethical, and he constantly negotiates the city, like his position within a society structured by colonial legacies and contemporary social hierarchies. So in this scene, we can see, so yeah, let me just watch this.
Tu veux qu'on cimetière, s'il te plaît? Oui. Il te manque le papier essentiel. Vous soyez tranquille ici. Bon, on s'arrête, n'entre pas. On va chercher le papier.
So in this scene, Borom Saret transport a bury deceased person. Like the cemetery hall functions as both physical and a symbolic space, revealing social stratification even in death. So Mbembe's concept of necropolitics is particularly useful to analyze this scene. He writes the ultimate expression of sovereignty reside in the power and the capacity to dictate who may live and who must die. So in the cemetery, we see how social hierarchies persist even in death. The wealthy may secure dignified graves, while the poor are relegated to marginal spaces. So this scene emphasizes how space, labor, and mortality are interconnected, and how cinema can make visible the ethics of ordinary life under structural inequality. So yeah, let's watch this.
Il s'en fiche de tes papiers. Oui. As-tu une autorisation de venir ici? C'est défendu ce quartier au Borom Saret. L'autre qui s'en va avec mon argent. L'agent ne lui dit rien. Il n'est pas sur le pied de ma médaille.
So here we can see as he moves through the city, he encounters authority in the form of a police officer. Like this scene showed the everyday negotiation with structures of power, revealing how post-colonial governance continue to shape life. Mbembe emphasized that colonial occupation was tantamount to the production of boundaries and hierarchies, dons and enclaves, the subversion of existing property arrangements, the classification of people, according to different categories. Here, the city itself become a material expression of social control, hierarchy, and surveillance. Borom Saret becomes both a tool of survival and a symbol of constrained agency as he must navigate the invisible rules. So to sum up, Borom Saret used ordinary life to eliminate extraordinary social realities. Semben's camera captures moments of labor, social interaction, and negotiation. This film demonstrates that cinema can be a space of moral reflection, ethical engagement, and ritual witnessing. Now, to move to the second film, Atlantis, directed by Mati Diop. So here the central figure is Ada, a young woman in love with Sulaiman. Her story reveals the intersection of desire, social constraints, and precarity, right? Highlighting how personal agency is shaped and often constrained by larger structures. So when Ada sneaks out to meet Suleiman, her boyfriend, at a dance on the beach, she discovers the dance floor empty because the young men have already left Dakar in pursuit of a better life. So this empty space is powerful visual metaphor for absence. So Laura Berland's theory of precarity, like theory of the impasse, right, is particularly relevant here. She explained that an impasse is a space of time lived without a narrative genre, and where individuals must navigate uncertainty, improvisation, and reflection. Ada and the women of her community exists in this impasse, negotiating the emotional, social, and ethical consequences of migration. So Atlantic, through its focus on these women, allows viewers to witness not only the personal consequences of migration, but also the structural, social, and ethical dimensions of global inequality. So it's also remarkable for centering the lives of women who are often left at the margins of migration narratives. Ada and her peers are living in a society where their agency is limited by gender expectations, social norms, and family pressure. Yet Joe portrays them as active, reflective, and resilient agents, negotiating the absence of their loved ones while making decisions about their own lives. So Berland's notion here is analysis of precarious life is particularly illuminating, right? She explains that one would achieve both mental health and a commitment to equality if one embrace precarity as the condition of being and belonging, right? The women's navigations of absence, arranged marriage, and social pressure demonstrate both the everyday creativity and ethical agency that emerge in conditions of structural constraints. As essential an essential aspect of Atlantics is the integration of the supernatural, right? The man who died at the sea, because at a certain moment we hear that from the news that they pass away. But so those men, um, so those men who died at the sea reflect something that is kind of like a ritual narrative space. So this cinematic choice, like choosing like this, how to represent it, this choice aligns with Mignolo's decolonial perspective, right? It opens a space for non-Western modes of thought, understanding, and storytelling that resist the constraints of linear and reminding the living of historical injustice, migrations risk, and the consequence of global inequality. Job's seamless blending of realism and the supernatural allows viewers to experience the past, the present, and the absence simultaneously, like making the ethical and emotional dimension of migration immediate and haunting, but also tangible, right? So in conclusion, Atlantics offer a profoundly ethical, emotional, and reflective cinematic experience by centering the lives of women, highlighting the consequences of migration, and incorporating supernatural elements. Mati Diop transformed the story of absent men into a complex meditation on historical, structural, and social forces, love, desire, and the ethical responsibilities of communities and individuals. Using Berland's analysis of precarity and impasse, so members' insights on necropolitics and Mignolo's decolonial frameworks, we can see that Atlantics invites audiences into a ritual of witnessing, where cinema becomes a space for moral social and historical reflection. We are called to observe the ordinary and extraordinary dimensions of human life, to inhabit the ethical dilemmas faced by the characters, and to reflect on the global historical and structural conditions that shape their experiences. In this way, Mati Diop continues the legacy of African cinema as a space for ethical engagement, social commentary, and emotional reflection, connecting with Semben's work while addressing contemporary realities of migration, inequality, and the haunting presence of historical injustices. So as we come to end of this presentation, we can reflect on the ways in which both films use cinema as a ritual of witnessing and ethical reflection. In Borom Saret, Usman Semben shows the daily struggles of ordinary citizens navigating the post-colonial city of Dakar, highlighting social inequalities, economic precarity, and the enduring effects of colonial structures of urban life. Each action, encounter, and visual moment in the film becomes a meditation on human dignity, moral responsibility, and social injustice. The city itself, with its streets, police prisons, and cemeteries, is a space through which Semben interrogates the distribution of power, the social hierarchies imposed by colonial and post-colonial governance, and the ethical burdens borne by ordinary citizens. Atlantic, by contrast, extend this reflection to the global stage of migration, love, and historical inequality. Matijo places us in the lives of those left behind, like the women whose daily existence is transformed by the absence of loved ones. The use of magical realism, the supernatural presence of the departed, and the ghostly metaphors of migration. So through Ada, Suleiman, and the community of Dakar, we experience what Laurent Berland calls the impasse, right? The suspended time of precarity, uncertainty, and ethical negotiation. And we see how individuals and communities adapt, resist, and survive within conditions shaped by historical and contemporary inequalities. Ultimately, these films transform cinema into a space of reflection, moral witnessing, and ritual engagement. They ask us to observe, to empathize, and to consider the ethical implications of social inequality, migration, and precarity in our own worlds. They demonstrate that cinema can do more than entertain, right? It can awaken, challenge, and connect us to histories, struggles, and ethical questions that are both local and global. Semben and Job remind us that the ordinary and the extraordinary are inseparable, that every encounter and absence carries meaning, and that watching cinema can be an active, contemplative human experience. So in closing, I invite you to consider this when we engage with films like Borom Saret and Atlantics. We are participating in a ritual of attention, ethics, and empathy. We are called to see the invisible labor, the haunted spaces, the absences, and the precarities that shape human life, access, history, and geography. Cinema, in this sense, becomes not just a mirror of society, but a tool for understanding, for questioning, and for imagining new possibilities of justice, care, and human connection. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Malik, for sharing with us the space of cinema and as a creative space that moves beyond entertainment and sort of bring in aspects of social commentary and ethical and issues of ethical considerations. So thank you so much to our three speakers, Adams, Felix, and Malik. And I hope you have your questions noted down somewhere. We move to the point of offering our commentary and our questions to our three presenters. So I would like to open the floor for that. We have like 30 minutes to engage with them, with our three presenters. So if you have a question, just maybe raise your hand, or you can type your question in our chat box, and then we can I will read your questions loud to our presenters.
Yeah, I just have a question for Adams, like because I noted like when he was presenting, so he mentioned Sulaiman Sise like film Yellen in 1987. So I just want to know how like this film because you talk about African futurism, Afrofuturism. I just want to know how this film reflect the idea of Afrofuturism or African futurism um, in your works, like in your scholarship. Thank you.
Maybe you can take another question before you respond to that, Adams. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Someone else with a question, maybe to Adams, then we can invite him to respond. Maybe let me take advantage of my position as a moderator to ask you this. In your presentation, you talked about the timeline with respect to the history of Africa. And my question would be this: what would be your view when you're talking about this timeline? Are we talking about a linear form of time, or it's non-linear? And what would be the place of cinema in reconstructing this timeline?
So may I answer the two questions?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll start with the first one. Thank you so much, Malik. And the question is how this film reflects the idea of African futurism. And so basically when we talk of African futurism as opposed to Afrofuturism, the main difference is location and the depth of acknowledging the African spirituality or the African tradition as something that matters. That is the big difference. So for Afrofuturism, it is located outside Africa. It is about African diasporas, especially the Black African Americans. So it is something that they try to ask, we live in a Western world. How do we fit into the new technologies and the new cultures and the new kind of traditions where we cannot find a space for ourselves? And so to do that, they create alternative ways, which are forms of fantasy, so that they can celebrate their own integration. I will explain. For example, we have the kind of music that the Blacks will create. So we have the hip hop culture, the gang culture, we have their fashion, they have graffiti. So all of these are ways of fitting in a very technical world while bringing something on board. Okay, so remember, traditionally they were descendants of slaves. So they were purely for labor. They were not being integrated into the technological revolutions. So the question is, what do we bring on board that we can claim is our own, as a way of belonging? So when you ask how is the film reflecting this, then I go to African futurism, which does not really care about only the technology, but also the location of that thinking. So the location here is important. African futurism says it has to be Africa, and therefore it has also to account for all the beliefs and traditions that I bring on board. And the example that Ned gives is Wakanda, the movie. So instead of setting the film in a Western space, it will be more appropriate to set it in Africa, the proper Africa, for example, and that makes a difference because in a way, then the film will absorb the environment, it will absorb the tradition, the ways of life. And remember, this is coming in from a very long tradition of Africans just being there, okay? And movements which I saw a while ago, for example, negritude, Africanicity, all these things, they are ways to actually ask me being an African in this world with just history of slavery. Remember all the history we talk about is history of slavery. Like we don't know anything else beyond when the slavery was there, that we were colonized thereafter, and then we are here today. We know nothing more. So all our thinking seems to be trapped in that kind of thing. And so Suleiman Sise in this film actually tries to bring in something that was there before this slavery time. And it is the tradition. What were Africans about? In this case, it's about the community. The film is set in the community. We have a son who has magical powers, and then he is in conflict with the father who is a witch doctor or a sorcerer or something like that. And so in this situation, I think they avoid all the things to do with the technology and say, look, Africa beyond technology is people, is traditions. They have their own local concerns, things that they have to worry about every day, not just technology. I mean, there are more other traditional things. So in that sense, I think that is how the film reflects that we can pause from the saturation of technology. So what is Africa if we pause? Okay, that's for me the big deal. I go to the second question, and thank you so much, Diana. The question is, what form of time? Is it linear or non-linear? And the place of cinema in reconstructing this time. Okay. So I think time for me is linear in the sense that we exist, our history is continuing. We cannot talk of history, we cannot flash forward history, if I say that terminology. So there was a time of before slavery, there was a time of slavery, there was then time of all these world wars, there was time of colonialism, then post-colonialism, and then right now we are in a time which we talk mostly about migration. We are in an era where migration is the thing. Migration, culture, integration is now the global thing. So time is linear in that sense. But it is also non-linear in the sense that when we think of ourselves, maybe we can go back to individual generations. You can recall back like 3 or 4 generations of your family, grandfathers. And so there are values that are handed down from that kind of generation. So if we talk of African futurism as integrating African ways of doing things, then time can be non-linear because we always borrow from that past and try to say, you see, these are the values that we bring along. In our culture, we do like this. In our tradition, we do like this. That is not in the future because it is we in the present who are trying to maybe customize, maybe give it to the next generation like that. So we can recoup from the present backwards and from backwards to the present. I think it worked like that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we have a question from Victor Hendrik.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to ask a question to Adams too. In your presentation, I was thinking about a kind of movement, a kind of manifest. I don't know how to name it. Afropolitanism. It's a concept talked about, coined from Achille Mbembe, by Achille Mbembe and Tai Selassie, and we can see other artists nowadays taking their view of Afropolitanism, and I don't know if this is consciously or not, but we can see this the essence of Afropolitanism in it, and it talks about kind of a type of identity that reclaims a new form of being African, a multiple form of being an African in the world. And I was curious if Afropolitanism is between Africanism and African futurism and Afrofuturism, or if it by any chance is perceived for you in your work. I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a rush in here, and but I was a bit curious with your presentation because of I have been thinking a lot of Afropolitanism and its polemic around it.
Okay, Dr. Mututa, could you respond to that particular question, and then we can invite other questions to the other two panelists.
Thank you so much, Diana, and thank you, Fitra, for the question, and also for bringing in the idea of Afropolitanism. You know, the thing I've tried to say here is, in as much as we look at these terminologies as revolutionary, as new grounds of thinking of Africa, it is my opinion, and that is the kind of argument I make, that they are recursive. We are just going back in time. Why? Because, and if you allow me, please, I can share, I think, just that one clip. Where is it? I'm trying to find the one where I was showing this movement. I think I closed them. I don't know, but I will try and find them. Maybe I don't know where to find them. But anyway, the one thing I was saying is we have, since 1930s, the movements such as Negritude, and remember in 1930s, Africa was colonized. We have in 1950s movements that is Africanism. And this is around the time after the Second World War when Africa was decolonizing. So the hot thing was decolonization. And so in 1960s, when we come to the question of Afrofuturism, of Africanicity or Africanism, it is a time when people are thinking of, now we are not colonized anymore. So who are we? What are we becoming? If you look at the literature from that time, and it is the time of Gungu wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, the big figures we know from Africa, and many others, it is a time of questioning. So we are not colonized. So what have we become? If you look at the autobiographies written in that time by former presidents like Kwame Nkrumah from Ghana, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere from Tanzania, we also have one from the Kenya's first vice president, Oginga Odinga. These autobiographies are actually asking, so we are not colonized. So what have we become? How do we describe ourselves? And so we have a lot of literature coming up, and also films such as the one I've discussed today. They fall within this, but especially the works of Osman Simbene is very vocal around this time in 1960s, 1970s. So Afropolitanism, which is about multiple belonging, can be understood as an additional way. And it is simply because it is appropriated mostly for literary and cultural criticism. And when we talk of post-colonial theories, it's mostly in terms of response to post-colonial literature, post-colonial cinema, post-colonial cultures, and that kind of thing. So in my view, Afropolitanism is just another currency to purchase ideas of transnational migration. It is in the same category as transnationalism, where people are moving all over and trying to find themselves in different parts of the world and we belong. And if we want to also fit this in the way the world is operating, like right now, or maybe from 2015, which I think was the biggest starting point of migration, mass migration, I think the big question of Afropolitanism has to be also understood with other kind of politanisms. Because as people migrate, for example, the big migration into Europe, big migration into other parts of the world, the question is, are you integrating? You know, it's a big question. So Afropolitanism cannot be separated from all these other cultural politanisms, because when people are going around the world, the question of integration is a big, 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 big issue. US, for example, is a big issue. Are people integrating, or what are they coming to do? Are we creating clusters here? So you ask how do we look at it? And I think the way to look at it is just another additional way to keep in touch with our time, because there's a lot of migration around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mututa. I now welcome more questions, or if you'd like to maybe comment on something from the other two presenters we had for the day. And maybe to, as a way of inviting these questions and comments, I would like to pose a question to Felix Mutunga. And my question would be this. When you look at the song Baby Baby, it sort of talks of an imagined possible future communicated to romantic interest. And the other song, Sasahivi, sort of seems to emphasize the now, the present. My question is how do you reconcile these two pieces of art in the context of mapping these livable imagined futures in the context of the Kenyan popular music genre?
Thank you, Diana. Look, so as you say, yes, Baby Baby imagines a future, which, as I say, is very problematic, right? Because it's framed yet again in these poetics of male insecurity, male self-making, and it sort of does not even imagine gender parity, a future that is, has outside conventional gender roles. The reason why we say that, I mean, the recurring thing in that song is, if I make it in life, then ndakushikilia pia wewe, I will hold you up or hold on to you or something of that sort, right? It's open to various translations. So we get in that same song, we get a feeling that this imagining of a future is actually sort of an incorporation. We do not take away the fact that there is an imagining of a future, but it's sort of, imagines a future where this musical persona and his love interest are sort of embedded yet again into other systems of inequality, right? The same thing now happens. Well, okay, so if you go now to sasa hivi is interested in the now, and I said that it appears, it seems to me that this imagining of the now, the love or loving right now, is very alert to the precarities that now are also rehashed in baby baby, right? But without, I would say, without the self-consciousness that we find in baby baby, right? So the loving right now is alert to that, and also it forces us to ask questions about what happens to the imagining of futures in places that imagining or the future itself seems to have been cannibalized already. Even before we move, these are yet again, I heard Malik talk about it, precarious futures. So the imagining of this future in a precarious position, in a precarious place rather, leads these characters to commit to intimate relations that are alert to these precarities, but expression of that love in this, for theirs, the future is imagined in the now, right? But in the fidelity that we can also draw from the now, because as I said, the love does not seem to be overwhelmed. For them, that there is a capaciousness of love that is imagined. So there is also at one point, there is also the taking away of that future, but also there is also an investment in the future, saying nitakupenda saa hii na kasi saa hii ni sasa hivi. There is also that investment in a future that is alert to these quotidian struggles of the everyday. But the future in sasa hivi is not at much more, is not a distant future. It's a distance of the now, this minute, as we live in these present moments, in these spaces that, make the characters precarious. So there's those two things that, we can read across both of the songs.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dr. Mutunga.
Dinah, I wanted to ask a question, but I
Yes.
can't raise my hand because I'm a
That's okay,
co-host.
Dr. Nana.
Uh,
You're
sorry.
welcome. Yeah, in fact, you are the next person I was to invite.
Yeah.
Okay, you're welcome. You can ask
Yeah,
your
thank you
question.
very much for the three panelists. I'm so sorry that I couldn't be there earlier because I had a seminar before and I couldn't manage to be there before. But I would like to ask a question which will mainly be addressed to Adams, but the Felix and Malik also can answer the question, is about this idea of hidden dimensions. Because Adams, you did this, you make it right by putting the difference between Afrofuturism and African futurism, where African futurism is specifically located in Africa, not only geographically, but also with epistemologically, but also culturally and other cultural practices which are in Africa. And when we consider science fiction, African science fiction, which mainly science fiction is related to technology, but in an African science fiction, we can't consider technology in the same sense as in the West, as in the US, for example. And some may say our technology might also be like witchcraft could be a way of practicing technology or doing technology. And so I wanted to ask a quick question about this. How do you consider this idea of, what do you think about this idea of considering witchcraft, for example, or any other indigenous knowledges or African cultural knowledges as technology in relation to futurism, in relation to futures. What will be your comment on that?
Thank you, Dr. Nana, for that question to our panelists. And just a heads up to our panelists, we have like 5 minutes. So please keep your responses brief, as brief as possible. If you see my hand go up, then that is an indication to stop talking if you are the one responding. So I don't know who would like to go first in response to, maybe you can start with Dr. Mututa, and then in that order, in the order of our presentations. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Diana and Lois. You know, it's 5 minutes, yes, but this is a very good question. Please, if you can be liberal a little bit, I think it's very productive. Now, the thing is, in listening to this question, how do we talk of witchcraft as a form of technology? And I find it exciting because I ask myself, what has technology been doing all this time? I talked of the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, third industrial, and now we are in fourth industrial revolution. In each of these spaces of revolution is always about technology, from mechanization to digitization, and now we are in virtual technologies and autonomous technologies, AI, and so on. So what about Africa? What is happening there? So the thing to understand is that the role of technology throughout time has been to connect people or to make life easier. So it has been about binding communities together, both culturally, but also in time. So we have a technology that will make, for example, the steam engine brought about new cultures of doing business. So you can transport material from here to a distant place very effectively. We can talk of the very, very fast technologies like the ships which could sail the ocean. That technology made it possible for slavery to thrive because otherwise people couldn't swim across the ocean. Thank you. I see your hand is up, but please, 30 seconds. So in that respect, we talk of technology in Africa, witchcraft tries to bind people the same way. Is in fact a very spiritual technology for binding communities together because it allows respect and community to thrive. If you believe that your father can curse you or the witchcraft can affect you, you behave in a certain way. And I think in a way it conditions how people connect, both now and also with their ancestors for the sake of continuity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mutuka.
Yeah,
Elo?
just
Yes.
to answer this question, like I think this is a very good great question because in many African worldviews, I think knowledge is not abstract. Like it's not an abstract theory. Like it is a system for producing change in the world that is exactly what technology is. Like the griots, for example, an oral tradition. So not just storytelling, but an information storage system, like an archive, for example, a memory technology that organize a society. Like for example, the divination systems, for example, I think about the Yoruba, for example, they have like, for example, complex mathematical systems, like ways of understanding mathematic binary computational systems, healing systems also, like for example, the Serer community in Senegal. They have their own cosmogony, their own pharmacology, their own psychology, and environmental science embedded in ritual. So I think these knowledge systems are already technologies, right? And they provide tools for imagining Black futures, African futures that are not dependent on Western sciences. And here, if you use the concept of epistemic disobedience from Walter Mignolo, we can easily bring those African epistemologies in contrast to Western knowledge system. Thank you so much.
Mutunga?
Yeah, for me, I think for me, I think I'll begin with the question of semantics. Why witchcraft? What does that term connote in itself? And I think when now you tie that terminology to the idea of technology, I think I'm much more welcome. It's not something that I've ever thought or considered thinking about, but now that you have raised it, I echo what my colleagues have said, that this is potentially a very productive can potentially be a very productive conversation, because in contemporary Africa, witchcraft, I think, still continues to hold a significant space, right? It's a framework through which people continue to use to explain misfortune, disparity, wealth disparity, social insecurity, and so on and so forth. So it's not a relic of it's not something that is static and a relic of the past. It's a belief system. There are knowledge systems that people use to interact with modernization, to interact even with Christianity, politics, and economic changes, and all this. So I think I'll take that as a provocative, question to think over time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mutunga. Indeed, it's a provocative kind of issue, technology and witchcraft. Thank you, Dr. Nana, for that question and for sort of stimulating our minds to go and think more about this. And I hope I've not locked out anyone in terms of questions or comments, but we've come to the end of our session. I just want to express my gratitude to our panelists, Adams, Felix, and Malik. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. Thank you to the audience too for the engagement and the questions. And this has been interesting. We've been mapping livable futures from Africa. And from my side, from here, the University of Tübingen, I want to say thank you, and I wish you a lovely afternoon. So as a way of, you can react maybe by sending a clap on your screen, but on behalf of all the people who have been with us this afternoon, I want to say thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye. One time.
Okay, over to you, tech support.